All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Gilberto, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Resource Development for the National Catholic Partnership on Disability. Welcome to this evening's event, What Does a Truly Accessible Parish Look Like? Co-hosted by the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America and the National Catholic Partnership on Disability. Following the example of Jesus, the National Catholic Partnership on Disability works with dioceses, parishes, ministers, and laity to promote the full and meaningful participation of persons with disabilities in the life of the Church. We're very grateful to be co-sponsoring this event with the Institute for Human Ecology. The Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America exists to educate university students, to give the Republic her best citizens, to sponsor multidisciplinary academic research on the intersection of human flourishing and Catholic social doctrine, and to organize events encouraging conversation between the academy and the public square. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention, you'll see that we have sign language interpreters with us this evening. We also have closed captioning, and if that's something that you'd like to use, you can go to the bottom right of your screen. You'll see CC and then live transcript. You can click that if you're not seeing it to utilize the closed captioning. The U.S. bishops in 1978 had a pastoral statement on persons with disabilities, which highlights a common misunderstanding, which is that we too often think of persons with disabilities as somehow apart and not completely one of us. NCPD and IHE have been hosting an event series for the past 3 years to respond to this misunderstanding, noting the ways in which we are all connected as one and all need one another. When we ensure that persons with disabilities are supported in their faith, every member of the community is better for it. We've spoken with persons with disabilities, theologians, pastoral leaders, and clergy who have all shared their insight. I want to thank those who have been to our events in the past. I've noticed that we have some regulars here, so thank you so much for attending these events over the years. We really appreciate it, and I also want to welcome any newcomers. You'll see in the chat that we have a survey that we would love for you to fill out to let us know why these events are important to you, what we can do better, how we can promote events that will help you and your parishes and in your faith. So please feel free to fill that out. This particular event was inspired by an online course that NCPD has been developing this year about the sacraments and persons with disabilities. Upon reviewing the course, we recognized a common theme, which is that there are a lot of opportunities to promote accessibility, a lot more opportunities than we would think. And we'd really like to make sure that we engage in those opportunities and take advantage of them as much as possible. So we're very grateful to have Michele Chronister here with us today, who wrote this course for us, which will be launched this June. And she'll be speaking with two people who she interviewed during the course, Meghan Concagh and Kelly Mantoan. So they'll be able to dive a little bit deeper into this specific question of what makes a parish truly accessible. So I'm just going to start by introducing Michele, and then she will be introducing Meghan and Kelly. So Michele Chronister is a national expert on the topic of faith and disability. She has presented at dioceses across the country and authored the book Handbook for Adaptive Catechesis. She is passionate about training parish leaders to teach the faith to persons with disabilities in a way that upholds the complexity and the richness of the faith tradition. To learn more about Michele, you can read her blog, My Domestic Monastery, which reflects on the monastic rhythm of family life. So thank you. And please remember that we will have a Q&A session at the end around 7:50 Eastern time. And so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our speakers, please put it in the Q&A box. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michele. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited to get to have this discussion with Meghan and Kelly as kind of a continuation of the other discussions we've had. So I want to start by introducing these two lovely ladies to all of you. Meghan Concagh is an undergraduate in religious studies at Fontbonne University in St. Louis, Missouri. In the course of her study, she's been developing short, accessible guides for parish use, encouraging a more inclusive, accessible environment for those with disabilities. She's passionate about using her voice as a person with a physical disability to advocate for those with intellectual disabilities who may not be able to advocate for themselves. Kelly Mantoan is a mother of 5, including 2 boys with spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, as well as a new foster mom. She is author of Better Than Okay, Finding Joy as a Special Needs Parent, and the founder of the Accepting the Gift Ministry for Catholic Parents of Children with Disabilities. Meghan and Kelly, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to just dive right in. I shared about your backgrounds in this little intro just now, but why don't we start by talking about the topic of accessibility and inclusion in the parish and why it's so important to each of you individually from your unique perspectives to share here. Meghan as a woman with a disability and Kelly as a mother to 2 boys who have disabilities.
Who wants to go first?
I don't care.
Go for it, Meghan. We'll let you go first.
Okay. So, I think inclusion in general is important because for people with disabilities in the parish, because I just know that I have a very special bond with God that I am no doubt beyond blessed to have. And I want to show people in general that all people with disabilities can have that and do have that. And people, just in general too, people with disabilities have a lot to offer the parish. So I think if they start in small ways, just by including people in the parish with disabilities in general, like it can grow leaps and bounds. Yeah, I just think general awareness is important, which is what I'm trying to achieve with my several resources that I have out now. Yeah, I just think general awareness is important.
And Meghan, I feel like you're kind of a powerhouse when it comes to advocacy here because you have both the religious studies, like theological background that you're bringing to it. It's like the academic stuff, but also the practical experience of what it's like growing up in the church as a woman with a disability. And so, you know, a little spoiler, but if any of you do tune into this course, Meghan shares a lot more about her journey there. And I think that's just, you have an extra oomph, I think, that you bring to it as somebody who can toe that line with both of those backgrounds. So thank you for sharing that. Kelly, how about you?
So obviously, I have 2 sons with spinal muscular atrophy, which is a degenerative neuromuscular disease. So they're both severely physically disabled. So they use power wheelchairs. So on a practical level for us, it was, how is our parish going to be able to accommodate their physical disabilities? Can they get in and out of the building? Can they get in and out of the bathrooms, the classrooms, all that kind of stuff? But then, and we were very lucky. We have a very accessible and inclusive parish. So it was great. But as I started, I have a blog as well as the ministry, thisaintthelyceum.org. As I started writing about our unique family and the unique challenges and joys, I was getting a lot of emails from other parents. And I started to realize that not everybody has this sort of parish situation where the parish was bending over backwards really to meet our son's needs. That's not the case everywhere. And so I started looking at accessibility on a national perspective, trying to find the good pockets where things are great and finding where parents were really struggling. That led me to start the ministry. But then also I just learned that, especially as my sons get older, I don't want Catholics in the pew, whether it's at our parish or when we're traveling. We have family in the Midwest, family all over. I don't want, people in the pew that don't know us to look at my sons with pity and, think less of them, or that they can't contribute. So that's also spurred me on as well to really, it's not just getting things better at my local parish, but it's really trying to do as much as we can across the whole country. So.
Yeah, that's really great. And, we'll get to this. Oh, sorry, Megan, go ahead.
And to add on to that, I just want to reemphasize, like Kelly said about getting to know Catholics in the pew. Like it's really important to me that people start recognizing me as a human, as a disabled Catholic, instead of just a person at church who's in a wheelchair, because that is a very strong part of my identity is a disabled Catholic. And I want to make that known to people.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I want to we'll get into this maybe a little bit more, but one of the things I love about NCPD is that they sort of cover a lot of different things. And one of them is, they have a council on mental illness, and they also advocate for people with mental health challenges. And so it's interesting. I kind of started working mainly with kids, a lot who had developmental disabilities and that sort of thing, and really enjoyed that work in the beginning. But then as I became a mother, I actually have 2 daughters with anxiety. I have anxiety myself, and I have a daughter with ADHD. And all of those are kind of like these hidden disabilities. So I think that this is something I have in the back of my mind as we're entering into this. We've been blessed with some priests that have been really supportive of my daughters, because, when you're a child with anxiety, it does affect a lot of things, even in terms of sacramental prep and stuff like that. And I think that kind of leads into this next question here. The fact that there are so many people who are falling under this umbrella, who have hidden disabilities, or who have a physical disability but don't have an intellectual disability, and people draw conclusions about them, like Megan, for example. And so I wanted to now kind of shift and talk a little bit about why this is necessary and how many people this includes. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about why accessibility and inclusion isn't just a good thing for parishes and dioceses to concern themselves with, but a necessary thing. So as I said, NCPD covers this wide umbrella of a lot of people who have, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, autism, mental health challenges, just like a whole wide spectrum. And that's a really broad group of people. It's a variety of categories. It covers a lot of people. I mention this because I think that the number of people who would benefit from greater accessibility and inclusion is a much higher number of people than I think, maybe a pastor would think of, or, a parish coordinator would think of, because you think of, okay, well, we need to have ramps, or we need to have accessible doors, but really it's so much more than that. There's so many more people who need that accessibility, who need that inclusion, and who might need accommodations made in order to make that a reality. So let's talk a little bit now, maybe starting with Megan again, about why it's not just good, but it's really necessary to take the time as a parish, as a diocese, to discuss and look into ways to make parish life accessible to anyone who wants to participate.
I think that making it inclusive to all disabilities, whether it be physical or mental health or learning, it just brings different perspectives to the parish, and people will learn different things, different ways, and get to know people and their experiences and just what they bring. And it's also really important because it just brings people closer together. It builds compassion in people. If there's all these different abilities around, and it builds community. There's stronger parish because of it. And I think what is the most important part is it will allow more people to get to know God and bring them closer to heaven, which is like the number one thing that all Christians should focus on, whether it's you have a disability or not. So.
Right. Because ultimately we're all members of the body of Christ and the baptized, and being members of the body of Christ, you're not excluded or different because of, the role that you play in the body of Christ. We're all necessary members of that body. So as you said, Megan, so beautifully, I think that the experience of the church is so much richer when we make a place for all those in the body of Christ to really be a part of the community and be a part of the church, because they have a place there. They have a baptismal right to be there. So that's really good. How about you, Kelly? I'm interested, especially in your perspective as a mother. I know, another spoiler to our course, but something we talk about in the course is how, even for parents of a child with a disability, that their participation in the parish is sometimes limited, because sometimes they even need extra, accommodations or flexibility or that sort of thing to participate in parish life. So just from the perspective of a family with members with disabilities, why do you think that this inclusion and accommodation is so essential and so necessary?
Well, it's so essential because, again, my sons, my family, disabled Catholics everywhere, they need the sacraments, all of them, as much as anybody. The sacraments aren't just for able-bodied people, but also, my sons, like Megan, physically disabled, but are not intellectually delayed. And even parishioners with intellectual disabilities can contribute in so many ways. And I think we tend to think of disabled Catholics as like, they're just there to get things. Like they just need the sacraments. They just need religious education. But they can give so much too. It's not like they can't also be lectors, altar servers, be on a parish council, be ushers. We're so quick to put disabled Catholics in a box and say what they can and cannot do. And that's just not true. Also, any of us could become disabled at any point. And again, as you age, you're probably going to slow down a bit. So when our parishes are more welcoming for all types, you're going to make it more welcoming for everyone as they get older, as things may change for them, to not only participate and receive the sacraments, but then give back. So it goes both ways, and when we're accessible, it goes both ways more. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I was just thinking that as I was listening to both of you talk, that I think that a lot of people, when they're entering into this ministry, or even when they're thinking in terms of accommodation and inclusion, it's like, oh, how can we help these people who are so needy and just need us? And it's good for us to help them. And it's such a narrow way of thinking about accessibility and inclusion. It's not about us helping other people who are needy. It's about recognizing that we all do have different areas that we might need additional accommodations, or we all have different things that we might need welcoming in. And this is just, other groups of people who are facing other challenges and who need that as well. But all of us have something to bring to the body of Christ, and I think, especially keeping in mind, like you said, a lot of people, I think, can participate in these very active ministries in the parish, but active participation sacramentally is not about being a lector or being, it's about being present at Mass and uniting the sacrifice of your life to the sacrifice the priest is offering on the altar. And every member of the baptized, from like a newborn to the most elderly person, somebody who is able to verbalize, somebody who's not able to verbalize their words, it encompasses everybody. All of our lives are part of what needs to be offered up to God as a gift of love. And we're also all called to this union with God. And I think, like you said, it's a recognition that all of us are called to this holiness, and all of us are called to this sainthood, and all of us have something to bring to the church. It's not just about, we need to take care of God's little lambs or those little angels. It drives me crazy when I hear that sort of thing. And I'm sure many of you have heard that too. But it's not about that. It's recognizing no, I need you in the parish because you have a gift to bring to the church that I don't know what it is, but I know that God has some way that he's going to work through you in the church. I always tell the story of a young man who was in his late teens that I prepared for First Communion and confirmation, and his name was Patrick, and he was only able to verbalize a few words. He needed to use a wheelchair for accessibility, just had, a lot of developmental disabilities and that sort of thing. But Patrick's witness to the Eucharist was one that stayed with me because, he and I practiced with an unconsecrated host before because he had a lot of like oral motor challenges and that sort of thing. And, every time we practiced with this unconsecrated host, Patrick just looked like disgusted. And it was just like, it's okay, Patrick. And I was just like, I don't know what his response is going to be the day of. And the moment that he received the Eucharist, which still tasted exactly like what we've been practicing with, I saw joy on his face in a way that I don't think I've ever seen on anyone's face before. And I always hold on to that because, an outsider might have been looking at that exchange and thinking, oh, look, Michelle's teaching Patrick about the Eucharist. It's like, no, it's an exchange. Like a catechist learns as much from those they catechize as the person they're catechizing learns from them. It's discipleship and being brothers and sisters on this journey to heaven together. So yeah, absolutely. Like everyone's contribution matters. And this kind of leads into our next question that we're going to ask about. Before we shift into practical considerations, I want to take a few minutes to discuss the necessity of inclusion from the perspective of vocation. So both in the broad sense of vocation as well as the narrow sense of vocation. So, there are persons with disabilities who are priests and religious and married and that sort of thing. But vocation encompasses so much more than that. It's ultimately our vocation, our call as the baptized to sainthood and to sanctity and, to a greater, deeper union with God. So I want to take a chance to talk here about the universal call to holiness of the baptized, and that, accessibility isn't just this practical thing, but greater inclusion of more members of the baptized has implications for the church on the spiritual level. It's not just what we can see happening, but there are spiritual realities that we can understand. So even for those who aren't able to do things like, lecturing or being an extraordinary minister or being ordained to the priesthood or, maybe even getting married or anything like that, they still have something real to contribute. And in some ways, sometimes those spiritual contributions are even more real than these practical ones we do. So I was interested to hear your thoughts on that in terms of this spiritual reality and how it plays into the conversation of accessibility and inclusion, because I think that understanding that helps us to realize why it's so important to focus on accessibility and inclusion. So Meghan, did you want to start?
Sure. Like you had said, you mentioned that Patrick, you had never seen a face light up as much as his did when he received the Eucharist, and that is so beautiful. I love that, and a story came to mind when you were speaking, and I think, Michelle, you're aware of the relationship I had with my grandparents and how that impacted my religious education and spirituality in general. But I just wanted to share it really quickly. A story about when I was, I think, in like first grade maybe, my grandmother and I, we went to the Adoration Chapel, and I was praying the best I could, and all of a sudden I just started to giggle, and then I started to giggle even louder and louder, and people were like looking to my grandma to make me stop, and she just ignored them and was like, it's her form of prayer. Like, you could tell, like, she was proud of me for letting that go and letting that joy be expressed. So I feel like what I've said in previous questions is just the joy that people with disabilities receive is so much greater than we can even realize. And just two other points really quickly. So I'm not sure if any of you are aware, but last year, as part of the International Day of Disability, the Vatican released a video series called I Am Church, meaning like we are all the church. And it detailed different Catholic individuals with disabilities and their different roles in the church. And one of them was a legally blind priest and a professor of canon law. And the other one was a group of women in consecrated life who had Down syndrome. And those are just two examples. If we let people with disabilities in the church with a broad vocation or a vocation like that, or like myself, the church can thrive in so many ways. Mm-hmm. And we can see so much joy that we didn't even know was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick reminder to everyone, be sure that if you have questions, you pop them into the Q&A box. They'll be feeding those to us in just a little bit when we finish our discussion between the three of us. But touching back on what Meghan said, I love that story of you as a child. And I love also that it highlights the fact that your faith has grown with you. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that, because I think that a misnomer I've seen about people with intellectual disabilities is that somehow they just remain like so childlike all the time. But an adult with an intellectual disability is still an adult who has, lived an adult like that many number of years and has experienced all sorts of different things. And there's a richness to that experience, whether or not that person can verbalize it or put it into words. But they're also, if they've been given that opportunity, they bring a richness in the number of years that they've grown in their faith, and I think that it's so beautiful that your grandparents were able to nurture your faith in you from a young age and support that, despite what other people might have thought or said or anything like that, because you wouldn't be here today working in pastoral ministry if it weren't for the fact that they did support you in that way. So thank you for sharing that. Kelly, what are your thoughts on this?
When I was thinking about that question, it's just so many parents, when we have a child with disabilities, their spiritual life never really crosses our mind. And when we go to our parishes, sometimes it's the first time our parish priest has ever even thought about sacraments or religious education for a child with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And so many parents, they don't know what to ask for, and parishes don't always know what to offer. Mm-hmm. And, the parents, we don't know what holiness or a spiritual life is supposed to look like for our child. And many times we're not given any guidance. Like I said, I've been very fortunate at our parish, but I've heard from so many parents who they're just not given any guidance. And it's almost like, I think a lot of parishes just don't know and don't even consider the spiritual life of children and adults with disabilities. It just doesn't go into planning religious education or other spiritual activities for older teens, youth, adults. But I just think it's important that, we as parents need to hear, yes, it's important that, our children learn about their faith and learn about the Catholic Church and are really prepared for the sacraments to the best of their ability. And it's important for us to hear that the church values our children's presence at Mass, at adoration, and that they value the contributions of our child, whatever they are, regardless of their abilities. And so I think when I was thinking about the question, it's just how, in a lot of ways, parents, especially those of us that had no idea about, disabilities or anything, when we were handed a child with a disability, it's like, it's just another layer to all this unknown stuff that we've been given. You know, it's the medical uncertainties, the practical uncertainties, and now it's like there's all these spiritual uncertainties as well.
Yeah, that's very well said. And that makes me think of something that is shifting a little bit towards the practical, but I want to mention it so I don't forget, which is the fact that I think a lot of people working in parish ministry or diocesan ministry might not be aware of how much goes into, you know, either being a child or adult with a disability or a parent of a child with a disability in terms of, you know, things like therapies and like, you know, yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of like, I've had kids with, in my family, I have had daughters with developmental delays, and they only had a few therapies a week, but it was so time consuming. And I remember thinking like, I didn't realize that there were parents that were needing to take their kids to like physical therapy, speech therapy, like occupational therapy. And, you know, if you layer on an additional requirement for parents in that position and say, well, you also need to make sure you bring them to religious ed every Thursday at 7 p.m. And if you can't do that, you know, they can't receive the sacraments. Like, it just seems like a sort of arbitrary requirement to have. Whereas, you know, when we talk about inclusion and accessibility, we're keeping in mind the fact that people have different life experiences. And, you know, especially for families that might have a child with, you know, some sort of medical complication or is in need of, you know, various therapies, their schedule might look very different than a family that, you know, just has to take their kids to soccer once a week or something like that, you know. And it's important, I think, for parishes to value those families and those children and those adults enough that they want to make the necessary accommodations so they can participate. And that's why, you know, I really just think that before we get into any sort of practical, we have to start with this understanding that parishes that are omitting members of the baptized from their parish life are poorer for it, and they're missing something if they're not including all the baptized, you know. So it's not a case of like, I mean, granted, I always like to think to like the National Directory for Catechesis is very explicit that, you know, parishes have an obligation to make sure that those with disabilities are catechized. And if they can't offer it at their parish, you know, to make sure that they're given the resources at a different parish, but it's not optional, it's an obligation. But I think that that language of obligation is so like stark. And I think that deeper and bigger than that is the recognition that Christ wants all the baptized to be welcomed and a part of the body of Christ and a part of the life of the church. And sometimes that means like, okay, maybe we need to equip this parent to be able to do some of this catechesis at home some weeks. And, you know, maybe we need to do some of it on Zoom. Maybe we need to, you know, have a different time that we meet with this parent and child. And maybe we need to find somebody who can be an aid to this child in the classroom setting so that they can be with the other kids. Like there's so many ways to make these practical accommodations, but it has to start with that understanding that we need persons with disabilities in our parishes. We need them because they're members of the baptized, you know, or I mean, I guess including catechumens as well. But it's not just that we have to do this, let's just get it over with. It's we're richer as a church if we have those with disabilities actively a part of our church's life. So shifting to the practical, you know, most people hear accessibility, they think of things like, oh, we need automated doors and ramps, which honestly, a lot of parishes are still lacking as well. So that would be a good place to start is, you know, if you can get an automated door and a ramp. Our parish, I know, has like one ramp, but the door isn't automated. So it's like, if you need to use a wheelchair, what exactly you're supposed to do when you come up to the door? Like, how are you supposed to get in, you know? And even from that practical perspective, it's not even just about at Mass, because maybe at Mass there'll be an usher there to open the door for you. But what if you're someone who wants to pray in the middle of the day? Like, you know, what if you were wanting to go into the church and you can't get the door open by yourself? And just very simple things like that that are part of a life of faith, like making visits to Jesus in the tabernacle. But in addition to things like automated doors and ramps, what are some accommodations, practically speaking, that should happen in a parish setting? So Megan, I'll let you go first again.
So this is a lot of what I'm working on for my senior capstone. So this is perfect. One of the things is, I think that parishes should allow people with disabilities more time for the sign of peace. Now, is that going to be
that's really good.
guaranteed? I don't think so, but they still have the right to exchange in the joy of the peace of Christ. And that can look like giving the peace sign, or just smiling, or just waving to individuals. And then there's another thing of reciting prayers at a slow pace. Now, is that going to happen overnight? No, but we can work towards it. And if people do things like that, there can be bigger picture things done, like a whole mass dedicated to celebrating people with disabilities and having those implications in place. Making music simpler, allowing people to move around, allowing for vocal tics, or just things like that. And then on the Parish School of Religion side, I think, like you were saying, I also have talked to a lot of parents in doing research for this, for my senior capstone, and they're saying that they need to do a lot of extra work to catechize their own children, and that shouldn't be the case. There should be extra training for people, for catechists to encourage people with disabilities to be an active participant in the church. And I think that needs to be addressed on a bigger level. And as part of my senior capstone, I have tried to think of resources for catechists for that area, but it's been very difficult. So as I get more experience, I obviously will create those resources, but I'm just reiterating that that is the most crucial thing, I think. And as far as parochial schools, just keeping that accessibility open and letting people go to school masses when they desire, and just praying with their friends and just other things like that. So I think there's a need for big things to happen, but I am trying, and I'm sure many of you are, as you've already stated, to cultivate a more welcoming atmosphere on a simpler level.
Yeah, I was going to say, just for a beginner point, I know the one resource of yours that I had a chance to preview was just a simple sort of pamphlet that could even just be put in pews, and it just kind of gives a very brief overview of like a vision for what accessibility can look like in a parish. And it's something as simple as just making people aware, because like I can remember even like as a child, not really, growing up in the 90s, like people didn't talk about accessibility and disability in the way that they do now. And so, I mean, I remember seeing some people that now I think back on it, I'm like, oh, I'm sure that person had autism. Maybe that was a verbal tic, maybe that was that sort of thing. But I remember just kind of being confused about it. And there wasn't as much of an environment of understanding that, like, we need to include people who maybe need to navigate the world in a way differently than we ourselves might need to. And so I love that that resource of yours that I had gotten to preview. It just kind of highlighted the fact that just raising awareness of the fact that different people are facing different challenges and different people are experiencing life differently in the parish, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be a part of parish life. Just that sort of simple awareness can be a big part of accessibility and making sure that people have a place at the table. So that's really good. Kelly, how about you?
Wanted to add that I think a lot of times when we think accessibility, you mentioned, ramps, automatic doors and everything, and that's all great. I am like hugely in favor of like parishes being not only, ADA minimum accessible, but like going above and beyond. Like we should be, in my opinion, Catholic churches should be the most welcoming, the most accessible buildings. I know it's not always the case, but I think also, unless you're actually disabled, you're not really going to see a lot of the barriers in your parish. I think it's so important for, people in ministry at a parish to really go around their parish with the disabled members of their parish and see where are the barriers, where are the areas that need improved. Do you have a lot of autistic children at the parish? Maybe you need a sensory mass. Maybe you really need to bring on certain staff for the religious education program. Do you have a large deaf population like really near the parish that isn't coming there because they have to go, halfway across the county to get to the only ASL mass? Like, why not offer it close by? I mean, listen to the people that are there in the parish that are close by, rather than just lumping all disabled people as like this huge, we just talked about, it's a huge umbrella that it covers so many things, but we tend to like just lump them all together. Yeah. And we're accessible for disabled people. Like, there's so many little things, that you can really improve for so many different people. It really helps to just get to know who's in your parish and what they need.
Yeah, that is so well said. And that kind of gets to our next question here, that accommodations are one thing, but then we have this idea of inclusions. Accommodations are making it possible to participate in parish life, but inclusion is a whole other piece. It's the idea of welcoming the contributions of all and not just doing them as, a burden or like, this is my job to be charitable in this way, blah, blah, blah. But really welcoming all the baptized, valuing all their contributions. So what are some practical ways that inclusion can be fostered in a parish? I'll say off the top of my head, the first one that does come to mind is, just getting to know individual people at your parish, like Kelly said, whether it's, the pastor getting to know people, especially if you can see a family with, someone with maybe not necessarily a physical disability, but something that can be seen. If somebody obviously has a disability, that's an opportunity for the pastor to connect and make sure that person's needs are being met. But I mean, just in the course of getting to know people in the parish as even a parishioner, I think a lot of those needs can be identified and a lot of those gifts can be identified. And just having that opportunity or having that mindset of welcome and community and forming that community, I think can go a long way. Meghan, what are your thoughts on just making inclusion and welcoming a bigger part of a parish community, especially for persons with disabilities?
Well, I think just there are a few things, just getting to know the person and their experience, because not every person with a disability has the same struggles, and you can learn a lot from them. And then going around to people with disabilities and inviting them to social events, just to know that they're not only part of the mass, but a part of the community. Yeah. And then another way, which is my favorite, because I came up with it, is a mentorship program for adults without disabilities to teach teens or to like help guide teens or adults with mental or physical disabilities in offertory or greeting or lecturing or serving. And this is like my favorite part too. I'm so excited to talk about this.
I love your passion about all this stuff, Megan. It makes me so excited. Like I always feel more excited after I've talked to you about your ideas. You have so many.
I have been in contact with a server in my parish who is a young man. Well, he's like in his 30s now, I want to say, who has Down syndrome. And he's been serving in parishes, I think in Illinois, for like 20 years. And he just started serving in my parish like 2 years ago before COVID. And I talked to him about just his experience, and you can see like the joy on his face when he talks about serving, because he clearly feels more a part of the parish. And that's just awesome. Like we all need that. Yeah, it's really incredible.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too. Just making sure that in terms of those more practical ministries that people can actively participate in, like making sure that those are ones that all are welcome to participate in. And it's just really important. Kelly, what are your thoughts on inclusion in parish life?
Well, I feel like sometimes, when a child or a young adult or an adult with disabilities wants to do something, there's like this panic that sets in at many parishes, like, oh, there's a child with Down syndrome that wants to be an altar server. Like, can they do it? How do we accommodate this child? What can we do? I feel like there's a panic. I had a woman, she's a contributor for our blog, and she shared a story how at her parish, they were concerned about her son with Down syndrome, participating in vacation Bible school. and there was like this concern. And so I just feel like rather than wondering, like, can a child or an adult with disabilities, can they really do these things? Can we just start with the assumption that they can't? Like, let's just start with the assumption that people with disabilities, they can do all these things. And then, no matter what the diagnosis, they can do these things. And then let's worry about the practical stuff. Because I think if we start with the belief that these are all things that are open to everyone, then we're more likely to find ways to make it work. We talk to the person, what are they comfortable doing? What are their suggestions? Chances are they're going to know what their challenges might be in approaching whatever the task is, and they can give suggestions for it. And then you can find a way to do it. So I feel like if we didn't freak out so much about it, like it wouldn't be that hard necessarily to really include everybody in the parish. And again, just then ask the people that want to do it, what would make it easier for your son or daughter to be an altar server? What would be easier for you to be a lector, to be an usher, to, what would make it easier for you to spend an hour in adoration on the adoration list, or First Friday list, like, let's just ask people, let's assume they can do it because they want to do it, and then work with them on it.
That's starting with that recognition that person with a disability is not a different species. Like they're the same as anybody else. It's just that there might need to be some accommodations made, and we don't need to be scared of those accommodations. They're usually something that's pretty manageable. So getting to that, our final question, one last quick question here for both of you. I'm thinking of my priest and seminarian friends now, especially those who are, poor, overworked pastors and feeling really overwhelmed and want to do everything, but don't know where to start. What advice would you give to a priest who wants to take just one simple first step towards greater accessibility and inclusion in his parish? What would be one or two really easy first steps to just kind of dip his toe in and get going? Megan, you can go first.
Okay. One last shameless plug. I have
shameless plug. I love it.
created these homily hints because I believe if priests start talking about inclusion in whatever way they can, in their homilies or just after church, whatever, like it'll become an easier way for parishes to think, oh, it's acceptable. So these homily hints are short little paragraphs talking about anything from Bible stories to church documents. And I think that would be an incredibly easy way for priests or seminarians to talk about inclusion.
And I want to throw in as part of that too, taking the time to get to know someone with a disability. Like if that's the only thing that a priest or seminarian does as their first step is just, all of us know someone with a disability, like this is a very common occurrence in our culture. And just taking the time to get to know one person to be like, hey, can I get some of your thoughts, as I enter into my ministry or as I continue with my ministry and what I could be doing differently? And I think having that humility to recognize that, priests and seminarians don't know everything and they have a lot to learn from the laity, and that, having those conversations and those relationships, they can learn a lot from that. It's not just what they have to give, but sometimes you need to be humble enough to ask and learn about that first step. How about you, Kelly? What are you thinking?
I think, something quick and easy, if you have a parish website, new parishioners that are wondering, oh, I just got this diagnosis for my child, or, oh, I'm looking for a new parish where maybe my family will be welcome. If you have up on your website, just say, this is, the person to contact in our parish. If your child, is preparing for sacraments and you have concerns or they need accommodations, here are some here's the diocesan contact. Mm-hmm. And then here are some great resources for you, NCPD, link to them, a link to Accepting the Gift, another plug, link to my book, put that on there too. Like, have those links there because, parents are looking for this stuff. There's, parents of children with disabilities, we're shopping around for parishes. I can tell you, we're looking to where we can take our kids, where our families are going to be accepted. And if you have that information on your website, we're going to come to you. We're going to flock to you. And then I think also if you're concerned, again, like talking to, parishioners that, are disabled in one way or another, if you're concerned, like, oh, there's too many of them, I'm sure there is some mom at your parish like me, or there is some, parishioner with a disability who'll be more than happy to be the liaison between a lot of people and to kind of poll all the families, who have kids with disabilities or no adults with disabilities, and kind of pull that information, say, these are our concerns. These are where we'd like to see some, maybe physical accommodations to the building. Here are some, concerns we have with other issues or, things that are working out really great for us. And then can just kind of present them as a list. And then, as the priest, you can just kind of work down that list as you're able to. You also maybe learn which families might have kids with disabilities that maybe you didn't know. You might learn a little bit more about who's actually at your parish as well.
Yeah, I think along those lines, two things. One, making sure that you've read guidelines for the celebration of the sacraments for persons with disabilities, which is available through the NCPD website, released by the USCCB. Great document, but it kind of covers a lot of these things in relation to the sacraments, but it applies to so many aspects of parish life. And I think, two, maybe making a commitment to never say no. Anyone who comes to your parish and asks for something, rather than saying no, take the approach of, I can't do that, but let me find someone for you who can, or let me connect you to this person, and just be able to have that commitment that you're not going to completely turn someone away or turn a family away or turn a child away, but you're going to find a resource if you don't already have it. And NCPD is here to help and is happy to do so. So, well, thank you so much, ladies. This is a really great discussion, and I could talk to both of you all night long, but we don't have that time. So can we switch over for the questions? Julia, I think we're ready for those. I think you're muted, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very fruitful conversation. I love how it ended with the disability liaison. We have, there are several dioceses across the country who have programs like that. And we've done a couple webinars on that and a couple tip sheets. So if anyone's looking for any information like that, please contact us because we'd love to connect you with some resources on that. I'd like to start. I've really enjoyed some people typing in with some comments of their own experiences. So I want to just mention a couple of that if anyone has any way that they'd like to respond to them. One, I might ask Meghan to maybe respond first, and then anyone else who'd like to. Someone said, my experience is that I have to push myself to be involved in my parish. It's not just ramps and elevators, it's being accepted. I was wondering if you had any words of encouragement for persons with disabilities who are feeling like they need to push themselves, that they're not feeling motivated because they don't feel really like the church is their home, which is how they, how we hope that they feel.
Yeah, unfortunately, I felt like that too at some point. But the great thing is that I chose my vocation in this way to help that push become a reality. And I'm hoping that my resources and my website, which will be coming up soon, and a lot live for people to see soon. So hopefully you get a lot of resources that I've talked about tonight through that. But just keep pushing, because you never know what you can offer. And it's just, spiritual growth is amazing. And like Michele said, like, it can't hurt to say no. So if you're scared of being turned away, like, just keep pushing. Like, that's all I want, is people to push for full inclusion.
I just want to add to the person who submitted this that I'm sorry you're having to do so much of the fighting. And, I think that the church needs to make it less of a fight for people to contribute. Even just all we have to do is look at the Gospels, and, Christ didn't pick the high priests and those who were like very knowledgeable in the faith and very impressive looking. Those weren't his disciples. He picked the people that other people forgot about. And the people that had to be pushed to be heard by anybody else. And I think that that's a really important thing for us as the church to hold on to, is that truth that, like, this is not how Christ sees the world. And so I'm so sorry that your experiences of having to push yourself to be involved and, of not always feeling welcomed or wanted or included, because that's not what Christ tells us in the Gospels, is that those that the rest of the world forgets are the ones that he is building his kingdom on. So I want to echo Meghan's beautiful words and just encourage you to not give up, because the church really, really needs you and really needs your contributions, even if they don't have the gratitude for them that you deserve for them to have.
Yeah, it breaks my heart, but we're all here for you. And there's a community out there that I'm sure doesn't know they need you. So find them. And then just watch your spiritual growth just flower and blossom into ways that you didn't know were possible.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Again, like what Michele said, it's amazing we still have to be fighting, and that those of us that are like struggling are the ones that are fighting the fight. It's not coming from people that, top down, it's like bottom up kind of, but I guess that's how it is. But I think, you just have to keep fighting, and you have to keep going. And if you can't find the community right at your parish, you can find it online, and that can hopefully give you strength to keep going locally. That's what I found has helped a lot of people. But I think also you might not see, if you're in the trenches fighting and you're pushing yourself, chances are someone sees it and it's making a difference somehow, even if it doesn't feel like it to you right now. We don't always see how things bear fruit, and God uses us in ways that we can't understand or expect. So keep fighting the good fight. And I think, you will find your community, and you will find the acceptance, at least more acceptance than what you have, hopefully.
Thank you. This next question I might start with Kelly on, and it has to do with something that you had mentioned, which is that parents don't always know what to ask for. So I was wondering, for any parents who are new to this experience of having a child with a disability, or maybe new to a parish, do you have any advice for them for what to ask for?
Right. I actually, here I'm going to be like Megan, I'm going to make a plug. I actually, on our website, acceptingthegift.org, we recently created a manual, a parent advocacy toolkit. Basically, it's like 30 pages of how to build up a relationship with your pastor, with your DRE, with other parishioners, how to really advocate for your family's needs, how to ask for things, what kind of things you can ask for, how to find strength to do what you need to do for your kids. It's sort of a whole toolkit that it's just going to give you a lot of ideas on how to do exactly what you're talking about. Because so many of us were given a child with a diagnosis, and again, the parish life, the spiritual life, it's this whole new unknown thing. And we might be the only parent of a child with a disability at our parish. We're a small parish, for years and years, there were no other disabled children at our parish at all. So we stick out. But anyway, so I would say look up our toolkit, but also just build a relationship with your pastor, with the DRE, and do it now, right away. So when you need to ask for accommodations, when you need things, you have that relationship. We were already well established at our parish, so when our sons needed things, they just happened. We weren't a new family coming in, making demands right away. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Your child has the right to all these things, but it helped that we already had that relationship. Get involved with whatever you can. If there's a mom's group, you can get involved with it, even if your child, develops differently than other children. You can get involved, or maybe it'll be your place to start a ministry there for other parents like you, either at the parish or outside the parish. But I think just work on building community with your parish priest, with people in the parish. And if you can't find support there, again, join us online at acceptingthegift.org. We're happy to support you and provide the support online if you can't get it locally, and hopefully connect you maybe with other people in your area to support you as well.
I just want to add one quick thing to that, which is that this is not necessarily something practical that you can do or need to do, but just for you to know, in the midst of that struggle, that your child has a right to catechesis and has a right to access to the sacraments. It's part of being a baptized person, is having that access. And there are church documents to back you up on that, like the National Directory for Catechesis, the guidelines for the celebration of the sacraments. So, if a priest or pastor gives you a hard time about this, just know you're not in the wrong, and you're not asking for too much. You're asking for the basics that are required for your child. So, I'm not saying storm into the office and be like, this is my right, but just for you to know, like, you're not doing anything wrong or being too needy as a parent. You deserve to have that home in the church. And if you're not finding it at your parish, don't give up that fight, because there are priests out there and pastors out there and dioceses out there and ministries like Kelly's that can support you in this, and you're not wrong for fighting for it.
You can be the advocate your child needs. You can do it. You can fight the good fight. You can do that.
Thank you. This question is for Michele. How do I respond to parish leaders who think that, they might, when they hear about accessibility, their response is, we don't have people with disabilities in our parishes, or we haven't gotten any requests. So that might stall any accessibility initiatives to happen. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's a chicken or egg scenario. If your parish isn't accessible, there are going to be people that write your parish off and aren't going to come to it to begin with. If they physically cannot even get in the front door, for example, or if you have an instance where either in your Catholic school or in your parish, catechetical religious ed program, it's been made known that they won't make accommodations or that sort of thing. I think it doesn't start with trying to see whether or not, do I see somebody who uses a wheelchair? I don't see anyone with a wheelchair. There must be no one with a disability. Like, that's just not how it works. There are always going to be people that benefit from these accommodations. But I think it really starts with the recognition that if we are lacking in some way as a parish in such a way that it's preventing people from participating in our parish life, and if we're not seeing people here, then probably we're lacking in a way that people aren't able to participate, then our parish is poorer for it. We're not fully living out our life as a parish if there are members of the baptized who are not able to participate in this parish life. So I think rather than start with, well, we don't see anyone here, we don't really need to do any of this, blah, blah, blah. It's shifting to the understanding that to flourish as a parish, you need to be a place that is open to any and all of the baptized who want to participate. So I think it really is, I know in a parish setting, people do need to focus on the practicals and the money and that sort of thing. But I think it's understanding it's not about creating new programs, like especially in catechesis, I feel like lots of times people are like, well, we don't have money for a new program, so we can't have kids with disabilities here. We don't have money for a special ed teacher, so we can't have kids with disabilities here. It's shifting that to understanding that, what can we do to make this possible, as Kelly said, possible for people to participate, but also just knowing that this is something important. And I think that if we move away from just viewing it as a mere practical consideration to a recognition that it's important that all are welcome into our parishes and that they have gifts to bring to our parishes that we need, I think that shift in mentality can go a long way. And that might be hard to cultivate in some parish dynamics, but I think it's a worthwhile fight to have.
Thank you. I want to talk briefly about, Meghan, this flyer that you created that was mentioned a couple times. People can find it in the chat, learn more about our participants, as well as about accepting the gift, and Kelly's resources as well. But when just looking at this flyer, there are some parts that I just think are so helpful for those who sometimes they have very good intentions of wanting to be welcoming and wanting to be helpful, but sometimes it's not always as helpful as they're thinking. So we certainly don't want to discourage those individuals, but maybe just provide some constructive and helpful ways to welcome persons with disabilities. A couple of things that stood out to me is you talking about, speaking at a normal rate and not exaggerating and using age appropriate language and making eye contact, things like that, speaking to the individual, not the caretaker. So I was wondering if you could just touch upon those and maybe some ones that are especially important to you.
Of course. That is why I started doing what I'm doing, because it's a touchy subject, because parishioners think they're doing the right thing and they might be overstepping a little bit. So these are just simple ways you can do without overstepping, like putting a hand on their shoulder gently and just talking to them normally, and if they have a communication device, wait for them to respond. Don't walk away, because that bothers me a lot. And just get to know the person and just be aware of them, because you never know what they can teach you. This line of work is beautiful, and I'm hoping to continue to build upon these resources. And I like to think of it as a movement and an empire. It's just beautiful. I forget where I was going with that, but just acting simply first can make a big impact.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I want to have some time for just some final thoughts, but first I was wondering if Michele, you could just maybe quickly just say what it was like writing this course on sacraments and persons with disabilities for NCPD, which will be launched in June. What was that experience like? What did you learn? That'd be great.
And I just kept telling, whenever we'd have like the check-ins with the NCPD staff, I just kept being like, I'm just having so much fun having these discussions. Like, it was so much fun to put together because, it's kind of a compilation of people coming from a lot of different perspectives. There are, theologians who we interview who bring their theological perspective to this. There are, parents of children with disabilities. We have Meghan, who has the experience of living with a disability. Just so many different perspectives to bring to this discussion of the sacraments. And something that I really loved was exploring it, from the perspective of scripture. So we have a scripture scholar priest who, gives a little bit of insight into the scriptures with each of our sections. There's also just kind of a theological discussion in all of them. There's practical in it. And I really loved hearing all those different insights. And I think this kind of drives home the point of what we're talking about here tonight, that all these different contributions and perspectives really make church life so much richer and make sacramental life so much richer. So it was so much fun to put together, and I hope people enjoy it, watching it as much as I enjoyed getting to create it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And when it is launched, you'll all receive an email knowing if you'd like to utilize the course. So I'm going to end with a prayer, but first I was just wondering, does anyone have any final thoughts before we sign off? All right. Well, thank you all so much for your words of wisdom. Just a reminder, anyone who's looking for resources regarding accessibility, please feel free to learn more about our participants and all of the resources on the ncpd.org website. We regularly have webinars regarding mental health, regarding church accessibility, sensory adaptions, things like that. And we're always here. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call or email us. We'd love to find more ways to support you. So I'm going to end with a prayer that we actually ended with during our last IHE and NCPD event. It's a prayer about St. Margaret of Castello, who was recently canonized, and she is the patron saint of persons with disabilities. NCPD will be traveling to her national shrine in Louisville, Kentucky on August 27th to celebrate our 40th anniversary. But she's an incredible saint. I really encourage you to learn more about her and maybe check out our last event with IHE about her. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear God, you created St. Margaret with a capacity for loving others and with unique gifts that some failed to see during her lifetime. You strengthened St. Margaret through her faith. You brought much spiritual fruit in her life through her prayer and her works of mercy. St. Margaret was often looked at differently because of her physical disabilities, yet each circumstance of her life led her to a life centered on Christ. St. Margaret loved Jesus with an intensely and profoundly, and she drew strength, faith, and charity from intimacy with the divine presence. Dear Lord, help us to draw from that same inexhaustible source of grace and strength. Help us to recognize the inestimable dignity of each person and to act with kindness and acceptance towards others. Through the intercession of St. Margaret, we ask you, Lord, draw us into the heart of St. Margaret and the salvific mission of our Lord. Amen. Thank you all for joining us, and have a nice night. Bye.